You have inside the Holy of Holies, in the most holy place, the Ark of the living God. You have outside in the holy place the lechem panim, the bread of his presence. You have the menorah, the lampstand. He hasn't mentioned this, the incense altar yet, and he hasn't mentioned the brazen altar on the outside or the laver. He switches now to fabric. In 26, if 25 is furnishings, 26 is fabric. And in 26, verses 1 to 6, I'm not going to read all this because this is a lot of content and I need to move quickly, but look what he says. 26, 1 to 6. Circle the words 10 curtains. You shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twisted linen of blue and purple and scarlet material. Then weave in cherubim from a skilled workman. In verse, this is 26:1. 26:2, he gives you the length, 28 cubits, and the width of each curtain, 4 cubits. Then he tells you that there are 5 curtains joined together so that you put these panels together into one thing. And then you put these loops and clasps of gold. I don't need to go into any more detail except for to say this. When you walked into the holy place, when you walked into this building, which is highlighted right here, this is 45 feet by 15 feet by 15 feet high. This first room is 30 feet, then there's a curtain, then there's a 15 by 15 building, okay? When you walk into this, if you looked up, you would see white linen woven together with some colors and some angels, because the angels are looking down on what's happening. Okay? Now the colors include a couple different things. First, there's a weave pattern. It's called sheshet. Sheshet, shesh is 6. It's a 6-point weave. And it has to do with the way the linen is woven together. And here's what he says. First of all, what's the number of the total number of curtains? There's 10. And so you'll find some people that want to make, 10 commandments and 10 curtains. I'm just saying there's 10. That's all I'm saying. Why are there 10? Because he said so. I don't think everything has to mean something. I think that some things just obviously do. If an angel's looking down at you, then it means something, okay? The colors are white, red, purple, blue. I told you back in the beginning of your class that thousands and thousands of snails were all over that part of the Middle East. And those snails, when you took out the murex snail, you could take him out and rip the snail out of the shell and get a little thimble, just a tiny droplet of dye base for red, blue, or purple. And remember, there's royal blue because only royalty could afford it. It took 10,000 snails to get a thimbleful of dye base. It was the only dye base that was fast dye that wouldn't run in the river when you cleaned it. And so this was a very important thing. He says, I want you to use blue, purple, and scarlet. These are distinct colors in modern world, but in the ancient world, anything in the blue-red range all came from the snail, and you didn't always know. You couldn't get colors to match. Why? Because it depended on which snails, okay? So what you tried to do was get a large number of snails and then mix it as much as you could so you could sort of balance the colors. Now, we do know that 49 times in the Bible, and where I'm going with this, by the way, is I'm looking at verse 4. 49 times in the Bible, in priestly garbs and in curtains, blue was used for royalty. I'm not saying that that's what it means here. I'm saying it was used that way 49 times in the scriptures. 38 references in the Hebrew scriptures make purple, argaman, something that has to do with kings or chiefs. For instance, Judges 8:26. It was a royal color. Scarlet is used 42 times in the Bible, and it usually means splendor. Sometimes it will be, though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as wool, like in Isaiah 1. But what's the big deal? What do you walk away with when you walk in and there's white linen, but woven in it is red and purple and blue? I think it's safe to say when you walk in, you're supposed to think, I want you to make your whole life in the desert a study in brown. Everything you see in the desert is brown. Little tiny bits of green here and there, but mostly brown. Your tents are brown. Your clothes are tan and brown. So you walk into where God is and you see red and blue and purple and white. What does it say?
Holy.
I think it's different. It's what's that?
That is different and set apart.
I think it's also colors of kings and chiefs, and God is my king. I think there's royalty involved in it. Now let me stop here and say, I don't think this is a waste of time. I guess the question I would ask you is, when you come in to worship God, how do you picture Him? Do you picture, see, the danger of I am a friend of God, that's a biblical truth, but it can also be a deceiving one. He's not your best bud, He's your king. And so walking in with a sense that I'm both invited by Him and He wants me to be there, and that He's not like me. He's high and above me and I'm just me. A.W. Tozer wrote this: what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Our view of God patterns much of our thinking about everything else. I think we should remember that, and I think when we're looking at this, do you think of God in majesty terms? I would put next to verse 4 just the word majesty. I think for a person in the desert, that's what those colors sung. They sung majesty. Now, I'm not going to do a lot with this, and I don't want to take it apart and kind of get into every, little piece, but could you just walk away with a sense that when you walked in and saw color and your life wasn't color, it looked cool? How many of you know that in the beginning of The Wizard of Oz, it was all in black and white? She hits her head, they open the door to Oz, and color appears on the screen. That's how unbelievably different it was to walk in the Tabernacle from any other tent in the whole camp. Let me go on and move to the next segment. 26, 7 to 13, he goes to goat hair curtains. Okay? He's talking about the goat hair curtains. And it's referred to as the tent that was placed over. So when you walked into this room, you looked up and saw these 10 panels going like this, and you saw these angels and you saw the majesty, but that's not what you saw from the outside. Over top of that was placed an entire goat hair covering that I want to tell you, I can tell you firsthand, is the heaviest thing you will ever try to put on top of a garage, okay? This stuff is goat hair. When you hook it together to cover this thing, I mean, it will kill you trying to get that thing up over top of the tabernacle, because I about died doing it. I actually came to the conclusion that they put it up in pieces and then put the gold snaps on after it was in position, because we tried it the other way and we all just about were crushed by the weight of this thing. Assume that he's not taking a forklift in the desert with him and that he's doing it all by hand. Okay? And that there's no, and Moses saith unto them, bring the crane over here. It doesn't go like that. Okay? So look at verse 7. Curtain of goat's hair. And he tells you how many, and he puts it all together. Now, the details of the curtain include the raw material, the size, and the arrangement of all the panels, right? The color was brown. It's that intelligent goat hair weave that we've talked about. The hair was sheared from a goat, hence the term goat hair, right? I can tell you that it took several hundred goat shearings to get the cover for this. So there were a lot of naked goats running around in the wilderness when I was making mine. Here's what I can tell you. The goat is mentioned in Leviticus as an animal of sacrifice, but you would most find it related to one specific sacrifice. In Leviticus 4 and in Leviticus 5 and in Leviticus 9, the goat is a sin offering. In other words, from the inside you're seeing majesty, but covering that majesty was the hair of what was an animal of the sin offering. So from God's side, it looked different than from man's side. Man looked up and saw the majesty of God. God saw a covering that came from the animal of sin offering. Okay? Now, over top of that, go to verse 14. Over top of that, somebody read verse 14 for me.
You shall make a covering for the tent of rams, skins dyed red, and a covering of porpoise skin above that.
Okay, there's two more coverings mentioned, and they may be the same, but I think they're different. One of them is a ram's skin dyed red, and it apparently is over top of the goat, dyed red, as though blood. Okay? And over top of that is a tachash. Tachash is translated there, porpoise skin. We don't know what it was. I don't mean we don't know what a porpoise skin is. A porpoise skin is the skin of a porpoise. We know what that is. I'm saying we don't know what a tachash was. So in some Bibles it's a badger, in some it's a beaver, in some it's a manatee, in some it's a porpoise. Here's the thing, whatever it was, we don't know what it was, but we do know it was waterproof. Why? Because badger, beaver, porpoise, and manatee are all waterproof skins. Whatever it was an animal that they stopped talking about for the rest of the Bible, so we don't know what they meant by it. So what is a tachash? It's a tachash, whatever that was, okay? And so we know that, here's the thing. From the inside, you saw majesty. But above it, you saw this goat hair. Above that, the ram's skin dyed red. And above that, a waterproof covering. Why? So it didn't ever get wet inside. That's why. God made sure it had a nice plastic sheet on the top, or whatever tachash is. Maybe it's plastic. Ha-ha, I've got it. It was from a plastic. No. Okay, so here's the thing. Everything on the outside appears to be related to sin and sin payment and sin covering, and on the inside it relates to majesty. Questions about that? I'm blowing through this, but I'm trying to do it so that you walk away and have some sense of what you're doing. Okay, what is this? The name of this whole thing? We call it tabernacle. In the Hebrew, it is mishkan. Mishkan is the word for a residence or a hut or a tent. Sometimes in the Bible, it's also called ohel. Ohel is the word for tent, okay, the tent of meeting. And so one of these two. I want you to go to 26:15. Let's ask the question that Zoe was asking at the break. What's the purpose of the tabernacle? If I have a purpose, I can put visual place of worship. It's visualization of how God wanted worship to work in their relationship. It's a visual place of worship. I also want you to know that it had the function of formation to bond people together to work on something. What do I mean by that? They're in the middle of the desert. They've been given a lot of cash and prizes. There's no place to spend it. And God says, now we're going to take up an offering and build something that you're all going to build together. My Baptist friends say, whenever your church is in trouble, build a building. Because whenever you get people to rally around one thing, it brings them back together. There's some logic to that. God knew that he was trying to form the people into a people, and so he gave them a building program, and everybody was involved, and everybody had, believe me, I've been involved in church building programs, everybody had an opinion, okay? Everybody was there. The third thing that the tabernacle did, though, was it meant for the Israelites also an illustration of the story of the obedience or disobedience found in the golden calf. In other words, people put together the golden calf because they saw a need to see something. Well, here was God's answer of something to see. He was going to give them something. It also tested their generosity, didn't it? Because just because I've been a slave for generations, now I've got gold, and now you're asking me to give it to God for the tabernacle, and that's going to test my generosity. So it did that as well. Not only that, it was a sign of obedience because God was calling upon them to do it. Now, when you get to 27, and I think we can probably do 26. Let me see what we need to do, because I'm trying to make sure that this is quick. From 26:15 all the way to the end of 26, 26:15 to 30 is all about the boards that hold the thing together. There are poles you put all the way around it in order to hold and hang the linen on. There are poles that actually hold up this building. And so it's really about the boards and the poles and the sockets and how you put it together. The second half of that, verses 31 to 37, are about the veil and screen and exactly what the linen around the outside, how you set it up and put it together. That's really what he's doing. By the time you get to chapter 27, you go back to furnishings. Okay? So, let's summarize fabrics then. What do we know about the fabrics? We know that God planned the weave of them, that God planned where they go, the size, the shape, what they're made from, the color, and each of those tells a piece of the story of worship. Does that make sense? Let's go back then, let's go into 27. Very quickly, I'm just trying to make up some space here so as we are flying through the tabernacle. In 27, 1 to 8, you have a story about what furnishing, what piece of furniture? This is the copper altar. And everybody will say bronze, and it's not. How do I know that? Well, nechoshet, the word nechoshet means copper, brass, or bronze. However, I happen to know firsthand it has to be copper. And the way I know that is if you put brass or bronze over top of wood, remember this is made of wood. It's a grill made of wood. How many of you think that may be not a good idea to make your grill out of wood? This is a grill made of wood covered over with metal. I tried it with brass, I tried it with bronze, I tried it with copper. Copper's the only thing that doesn't burn the wood underneath. I'll tell you why. Copper spreads the heat out evenly so that it doesn't burn the wood underneath. So I'm going to say, based on my own experiment in the desert of Israel, that it does not work to make it brazen as bronze. Let me say this. This is the mizbeach, the altar. Comes from zabach, which is the word for slaying or slaughtering. And when you entered the enclosure, the first thing that you would have seen was this altar. It was about this big, by about this big, by about this tall. It's a big grill. And nearby to it, on the side, I added a series of killing stations. I made killing stations over here. They're not in the text, but I couldn't find a way to kill animals without getting blood all over the place. So I went to the Samaritans that still do sacrifice once a year. And they literally have these pits that they dig and these rings, and you put the animal through the ring and slice it, pull back on his nose and slice his throat, and the blood goes down into the pit. Then you take, and there's these tall pillars with hooks on them. You take the back of the animal and you hook it up on the hook and you begin to divide the animal. So I put them in here because they needed a practical place to do this. You got to remember, if there's a lot of sin in the camp, there's a lot of blood on the floor. And they're not allowed to splash any blood on their uniform at all, not a drop, which means they got to have a place to collect the blood. So what we did was we put this out, then we poured blood in the bottom of it and allowed it to sit in the sun. And in a matter of a couple hours, if you just put a light casting of sand over in it, you remember what the Latin word for sand is? Arena. We got the word arena for pouring sand over the blood from the gladiatorial contest. So we would pour sand over top of the blood and it would coagulate, and then we could take a shovel and peel it up and get it out. That's how we got rid of it. So the liquids would seep into the ground, and then the coagulants would actually become like a blood sand cake, and you could kind of peel it up, put it into a wheelbarrow and take it out. So this is a killing station. An altar looked something like this. It was a grill on top. It had ears on the four corners. What are the ears on the four corners of the altar? By the way, this is not as easily movable. And on mine, I built a ramp of stone. that went up to it. In the temple, later on, they had a ramp. So I'm assuming that everywhere they stopped the tabernacle, they rebuilt the ramp. Okay? It doesn't say that. I'm just saying I tried to make it practical. They either built steps or a ramp because there's no way to get everything up on top of there. This is a big grill. What are the corner pieces for? What are the ears on the four corners? They're horns, and what are they for? What's that? You do sometimes put blood on them as part of the sin offering. You sprinkle blood to each of the horns, but there's something else, a very important function. When you were reading in the scriptures, a couple of kings used these. End of Solomon's life. Adonijah, he's having a party. He thinks he's next king because he's the older son. Solomon is put on the throne. Adonijah and Joab run and they go and touch the horns of the altar. What are they doing? They're saving themselves. It is a base. It's like base when you're playing a game. It's a place you can go under the law where they can't touch you. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for Joab because Solomon said, I don't care if he's in the middle of his prayer, kill him. So, but normally this was a place that you could go. Okay, so the corners of the altars, or the horns of the altars. Okay, there's a door to the enclosure that's around the outside. I don't have a door here. Most people put the door like this. I put mine out like this, and I'll tell you why. If you put the door right up to the enclosure, then getting animals in and out will dirty all the linens. How do I know? Because it did. I couldn't keep the linens clean and bring animals in and out, and you're talking about that's its purpose. So I separated these and put a bar that went like this and a bar that went like this, and made this very colorful enclosure right there, but you walked in this way or this way. Does that make sense?
Like bathroom.
Yeah, just like a bathroom block view. But there's something else. Remember there were hanging on the sides here some silver trumpets. Do you remember what they were for? People didn't have watches. If you're going to call an assembly, somebody's got to blow a trumpet. So there was a shofar to blow the trumpet, or if they were at a time of war, there would be silver trumpets that if you heard them in certain patterns, you knew which direction the tribes were supposed to gather first. So, do you remember what you did at the doorway here? You brought your animal, and what'd you do? When you were reading through the law and you were trying not to fall asleep, what did you do when you brought your animal to the tabernacle? Besides kill it. Good, good, very good. Somebody didn't sleep through that section. Why do you put your hand on the head of your animal?
It was a symbol of passing your sin on to the animal.
You are symbolically saying this animal is going to represent my sin, and then they're going to go kill it, and that's your sin. That's a graphic reminder of your sinfulness, right? Well, here's the thing. If this was flat, how could anybody see it? It's supposed to be public. You can't see it if you're doing it inside of something that's got heavy colors to it, and you go inside and you lay your hand on it. So I surmise that it's like this. I've had people question me about that repeatedly. The rest of the passage in 27 is, let's see if I can do this quickly. The court of the tabernacle is verses 9 through 21, and it tells you about all of the hangings and what the hangings were for, what the coverings were for. And let's see, I just want to see I want to get us to where we need to be. Yeah, I think that's as much as we need to do of that. If 26, you had fabrics. We're going to move on now from 27 to 28, and we're going to do fragrances. Okay? I'm just trying to get you through this. I know it's kind of heavy. All right. In 28, you know what? I have more fabric to do before I can get you to fragrances. Sorry. Let me do the uniforms of the priests. Okay? So 28, 1 to 43 is all about the uniforms. Why do people wear uniforms?
Distinguish themselves in their position.
To distinguish themselves in their position. It identifies them, right? So when you show up if a police officer walks in and he's dressed as a police officer, you don't have to ask, gee, I wonder what you do for a living. Are you a plumber by chance? So what they do is they put a specific set of uniforms on the priests. Now, what do the garments tell us about the purposes and priorities of the servants of God? That's the question. So behind chapter 28, somewhere alongside 28, ask this question. What do the garments tell us about servanthood, about the servants of God? What is here? Now, remember that these guys already have the identity of a relationship with God, and they have a position to be leaders in a relationship with God. And that they're there to help other people. So let's pick up in 28:1. Then bring near to yourself Aaron your brother and his sons with him, and from among the sons of Israel, to minister as priests to me, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, Itamar, Aaron's sons. All right. God picks the servant team. That's what verse 1 says. God picked the team. This wasn't a democracy. It wasn't specifically nepotism. This is God selecting who he wants on the team. So, let's say God picks the servants. Second, let's go to verse 2. You shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother for glory and for beauty. All right? Second principle, God told them to wear things with a uniform that had a purpose. The uniform isn't a happenstance. God said for glory, for beauty. So, in other words, when God decorated his own uniforms, he wanted them to show his glory and to relate his beauty. Well, I want you to notice, who is Moses told to do this for? Aaron, but how is Aaron described here? This isn't a tough one. Your brother. Why? Familiarity breeds contempt. So he takes his family heritage, his family relationship, and says, I want you to put on him something that says he's special, not just your brother. You remember Jesus said a prophet is not without honor except for in his own country. It's easy for us to look at the person who's serving us in the name of the Lord and see another person and not see the office. I want you to put a uniform on because of the office. I want you to symbolize this isn't your brother anymore, he's now the priest. I want glory and beauty to cover over your brother so you see him as something else. Does that make sense? One of the things that happens is I think that a lot of people, Ben goes through this. He goes through this because he's young. I don't go through this because I'm not young. I was young and I went through this when I was. What happens is people discount you because of your age. They're no longer listening to what you're saying, which is true. They're looking at who you are and deciding not to listen. Listen to this quote. It's an actual quote. I see no hope for the future of people if they are dependent on these frivolous youths of today. For certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was a boy, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of others, but the present youth are exceedingly wild and impatient. That was the Greek poet Hesiod in 700 BC. Why do I read that to you? Because youth have always been looked at that way. Always. It's always been, oh, these kids today. 700 BC, they were already saying it, okay? Here's one, a little closer to our day. Another well-known speaker said, youth today love luxury. They have bad manners and contempt for authority, no respect for older people. They talk nonsense when they should work. Young people do not stand up any longer when adults enter the room. Oh, for the good old days. They contradict their parents, talk too much in company, guzzle their food, lay their legs on the table, and tyrannize their elders. That was Socrates in 420 BC. Keep marching ahead, it gets better. Here's one. The world is passing through troublous times. The young people of today think nothing but themselves. They have no reverence for their parents or old age. They are impatient of all restraint. They talk as if they know everything. And what passes for wisdom with us is foolishness with them. As for the girls, they are forward and immodest and unwomanly in speech, behavior, and dress. That was Peter the Hermit in the year 1274. And the reason I like these is it just reminds you that all the complaining that we do right now has always been true. I want to tell you something. You're going to hear something, and you're going to hear it a lot, and you're going to hear it in the next few years over and over and over. You're going to hear people say demographics are destiny. Young people don't care about same-sex marriage, so it will be de facto, they don't care. They're going to say demographics are destiny. I want to tell you something. No, they aren't. You know why? Because people who are teenagers don't think about a lot of things that they start thinking about when they start having kids in their 20s and 30s. What people don't understand is that they change as they get older. The things you care about right now are not the same things you're going to care about a decade from now. They're not. You will be surprised how different you look at life after marriage from before marriage. Now, it's not like just you're married, but there's all... Guys, let me tell you, here's the difference. You're just responsible for you. And suddenly you're responsible for another person and the potential of all the people that come from that. And so you start thinking very carefully about what you're doing. Stupid men just buy video games and don't take care of paying the rent. Okay? Because you're not only going to lose the house, you're going to lose her. So you think differently immediately. You start thinking. So one aspect of this is truly the older people don't remember what it was like to be younger. But another aspect is the younger people won't stay that way. All the old people you know used to be young people. All of them. Okay? It's not just that you get older, it's that you change what you think about. And so the demographics that are being given to us today about what young people care about are not the same thing they're going to care about in 15 years. It's going to change. Guess what? They get more conservative as they get older. Did you know that? How shocking. People get more conservative as they get older. Why? Because they learn more about what can go wrong. So not only do older people forget what they were when they were young, but young people don't stay young in their thinking. Don't worry that demographics are destiny in our country, because we still have the right to make our case. And if we make it well, people will sign on. The problem with the secular world that we live in is the church. The problem is we don't know our Bibles. We don't know how to describe what God is really saying. We have these bullet point fortune cookie Bible things, and all over Facebook are Christians that are just slicing the Bible to pieces. No wonder the world can't figure out what we're saying. We don't know what we're saying. So when we get our act together and know what we're saying, people will listen. I don't find people resisting me often, even on Facebook. I don't find them like, oh, that's just ridiculous. Because here's the thing, if you have the verses to back you up and say, please explain to me what this means if it doesn't mean what it says. Please explain that to me, because the onus is on you. I'm telling you it's there, you're telling me it's not. Here it is, now tell me why you can see it not there. And what you'll find is people will back up and they'll stop doing this stuff. My suggestion to you is that I want you to pick your brother, but I want you to dress your brother for success, is about learning respect and putting respect on the office. So the adornment was not supposed to be haphazard, but it was also chosen and specified by the Word of God. In verses 4 and 5, it says, okay, here's the breastpiece, the ephod. What's an ephod, by the way? An ephod is a piece that goes over top of, it's a piece that has a little hook here. It comes down, it's like a bib. But it has on it stones. And they are used to discern God's direction during the ancient period. And we don't know exactly how they work, but we have some ideas. At any rate, you're also supposed to put on a tunic, a turban, a sash, which is a belt, and these are holy garments. By the way, you need to know what these are, because later on people are going to show up to prophets, and they're going to be dressed like this, and you need to know who they are. In the Bible, if Jesus appears and he's dressed with a sash and a turban, and he's wearing a white linen robe, what is he? A priest. If you see in heavenly places a bunch of people walking around dressed like this, remember that the tabernacle on earth is a copy. The one in heaven is the original. And those guys are already operating that one. So, it's all based on God's specs. All right, go all the way down to verses 6 through 14. I'm going to wrap this up in just a minute. 6 through 14. There's a truth about the work of the priest. What was the purpose of the ephod? Well, it had these heavy stones on it that gave God's direction, right? So circle the word ephod in verse 6. Now look in verse 7 and underline 2 shoulder pieces joined at the 2 ends. What are the 2 shoulder pieces? Here's what I want you to know. The ephod was how you find God's direction, and it's heavy. Why did God put it on him? Why couldn't he just lay it on the table and God could do it there? Why is it on the priest?
Like a reminder or
Yeah, what's it a reminder of, Jonathan? What is he remembering?
direction? Like to keep going to God's direction, I guess?
This is hard. I got to carry around the weight of knowing what way to go next. Part of the job of the priest was to have the weight of people's need to know what to do on their shoulders. So God said, don't put it on the table, wear it. I don't want this to be easy. We're going somewhere with this. You are a priest. The New Testament will say, you as a believer are a priest of the living God. It's not supposed to not be heavy. It's supposed to be heavy on you. And what is supposed to be heavy specifically?
Handling his direction well?
Helping people find God's direction. It's not supposed to be flippant or fast. Part of the job of a priest, of the high priest here in particular, was to bear these 2 stones. In verse 12 it says 2 stones on the shoulder pieces, and Aaron shall bear their names before the Lord on his shoulders. These are 2 heavy weights that hold on a heavy cloth that has heavy stones, and he is to bear the weight of finding God's direction for people's lives. It's part of the job of a priest. It's not all just, walking around in the costume and having fun. Servants of God need to be able to pray. They need to desire to pray. They need to be careful to pray. They need to be hungry to pray. They need to be joyful in prayer. They need to be seeking God's direction for the people that they lead. That's part of what that priest was to do. Does it make sense? I think what you need to walk away with is, I'm not trying to be all like mystical. It was heavy. It was uncomfortable. And trying to sit down with people and help them decide their future based on what God has said is a heavy thing. And if you do it well, it means that you will feel the weight and be tired. If you are interceding for people and you are praying for people, when you get finished praying, if you've really prayed, you ought to be tired. It's a weight. Intercession carries with it a weight. Here's the thing. We treat prayer like it keeps us from, our food from giving us an illness or something. Keeps the boogeyman away while we sleep. That's not what prayer was intended to do. Prayer was seeking God's audience and emptying our self-will and resetting our expectations and getting direction from Him. It's all of those things. I want to argue that the church is going to slog on anemic until the forces are engaged in prayerful ways. The forces of darkness have to be taken on, and the forces of light have to be engaged in meaningful ways, or we are just going to continue to do this in the flesh. And we can't. We can't afford to do that. 28:15 is where I want to pick it up. Okay? And I want to underline in 28:15 breast piece, or breast piece of judgment. And verse 17, 4 rows of stones. And what this is the description of that ephod, that breast piece that had the heavy weights on it. Verse 21 says the stones will be according to the names of the sons of Israel, 12 stones. So 4 rows, 3 in a row. And that verse 30 says, you shall put in the breastpiece of judgment the Urim and the Thummim, and they shall be over Aaron's heart when he goes in before the Lord, and Aaron shall carry the judgment of the sons of Israel over his heart before the Lord continually. These two stones that got tucked in behind were stones of some sort that got stuck in the back that he brought out. We're not exactly sure if he cast them before the Lord. We don't know what he did with them. We only know that they're mentioned as being the stones of judgment. So, judging direction was a major feature of priestly work, but it was not entrusted to just any priest. The high priest carried a special responsibility in doing this to the Lord on the behalf of the people and asking for direction. One of the things I'm concerned about is when you read 15 to 30, do you notice in the scriptures how careful God is about the judgment of direction for God's people? I guess what I'm concerned about is the haphazard nature of people in the decision-making process that are God's people. I keep finding people that seem to be very haphazard about what they think the Lord wants them to do. I'll run into people and they'll go, well, I'm just sure the Lord wants me involved in this ministry. He's just told me he wants me doing this. I see them again 3 months later and they're not involved in that at all because now they're sure God wants them to be doing something else, and I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with God. Like, why are they not able to stick with anything? I think one of the things we have to understand is that you don't handle truth in a casual manner. And we're going to face God for the way we've allowed people to misshape theology. So the state of ministry in our time is not good, in part because people don't take decision-making processes very seriously. I'm amazed at the number of people that walk out on a spouse without actually thinking through, what does this look like 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? How is this going to affect the way my child is going to look at me? They don't seem to put all that together. It's like, well, that's it, I'm sick, and then out the door they go. And then the next 6 months, they're talking to me about how this isn't right. You know, my kid doesn't feel about me the way they used to. Well, you walked out the door. And I keep trying to figure out why we make haphazard decisions in our time that are very serious decisions. Okay, drop down to 31 to 35. And in 31, you will make the robe of the ephod olive blue. So there's apparently there's a rim or a robe around this breastplate, and that is all blue. And there shall be an opening at the top of it, in the middle of it. Around its opening there shall be binding work of woven work, like the opening of the coat of mail, and it will not be torn. In other words, this is like an envelope that hangs on the front of you, but that has an opening in the center that has extra work around it. Verse 33 says, you shall hem pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet material all around the hem. Now look, bells of gold between them all around. A golden bell and a pomegranate, a golden bell and a pomegranate. In other words, pomegranate, golden bell, all the way around the hem of the garment. Has anybody ever heard a story told to you that said when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, they had to have a rope tied around them in case they didn't hear the bells, and then they could pull them out? Yeah, you won't find it anywhere in the Bible. And here's the thing that I can't figure out. Before the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, which is one time a year, he takes off the garment that has the bells on it. I can't figure out where this story came from. I'd love to know, but it's not the Bible. And clearly, if they're listening for bells, he took off the thing that had the bells on it. They'd be yanking them out every time. So he's wearing his white linen. I have no idea where this came from, but I've heard it. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times, and I can't figure out where it's coming from. At any rate, if you can find the person who's saying it, hit them for me, please. Okay. But here's the description of you understand that the hem is on the blue garment. It's not on the white one. When you go into the Holy of Holies, you go in only with the white one. So, verse 35, it shall be on Aaron as he ministers, and its tinkling shall be heard when he enters and leaves the holy place before the Lord, so that he will not die. I'm wondering if they're reading that and thinking it means when he goes into the Holy of Holies. It says the holy place. That's the Holy of Holies. They're on the wrong place. At any rate, stories being what they are, it stays around. I think one of the things, entering the presence of the Lord was a sacred thing. And I want you to know when you walk into the holy place, you ought to get the idea it's a holy place because it's called the holy place, okay? But when you walk inside there, entering the presence of the Lord is a sacred thing. It's not something you take lightly. And we still need to be aware of this even though we don't have the same structure. So what you don't do is just casually burst into, God's neat, let's eat. You're not praying. When you come into the presence of the Lord, you need to have a certain amount of respect for what you're about to do. Now, I know you're in the Lord's presence all the time, but when you acknowledge it, that means something. By the way, God is here too, not just here. God is there and 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 there. But when you walk in, you're attempting to have a meeting with God. And that means you need to take it seriously. Let me read this to you. This is from Francis Chan. I think it's well worth listening to. We are a culture that relies on technology over community, a society in which spoken and written words are cheap, easy to come by, and excessive. Our culture says anything goes. Fear of God is almost unheard of. We are slow to listen, quick to speak, and quick to become angry. The wise man comes to God without saying a word and stands in awe of him. It may seem a hopeless endeavor to gaze at the invisible God. But Romans 1:20 tells us that through creation, we see his invisible qualities and divine nature. When we look into the vastness of God's heavens, what is our reaction? Are we speechless, amazed, humbled? When I first saw those images, I had to worship. I didn't want to speak or share it with anyone. I just wanted to sit quietly and admire the Creator. It's wild to think that most of these galaxies have been discovered only in the past few years, thanks to the Hubble telescope. It means they have been in the universe for thousands of years without humans even knowing about them. Why would God create more than 350 trillion galaxies, and that's a conservative estimate, that generations of people never saw or never even knew existed? Do you think maybe it was to say, wow, God is unfathomably big? Or perhaps God wanted us to see these pictures so that our response would be, who do I think I am? R.C. Sproul wrote this. He said, men are never duly touched and impressed with a conviction of their insignificance until they've contrasted themselves with the majesty of God. I think that's a good line. The important thing to remember is that you can't be casual with this. This guy had to put on a special uniform with a special weight and a special heaviness, and the features of the uniform actually weighed him down and let him know what his job was. In some ways, I admire churches that have uniform codes. I do. I would probably wear a robe to preach. You know why? First of all, it saves you a lot on various clothes because, you just stick the thing over top of whatever you're wearing. But there's another very practical reason. When you put on the mantle of preaching God's word, it's something holy, and it's not you, it's the word that's to be featured. And what I get concerned about are people that will not take seriously what the word says because of the person delivering it. Now, I'll tell all of you, it gets better as you get older. Somehow, when you get grayer hair, people go, okay, he must be serious. I don't know why, because I don't find that to be true. I find some young preachers to be absolutely fabulous. But I have to tell you that nevertheless, people don't take you seriously. And I wonder if when you put on the robes here, if Aaron didn't get treated differently when he had the robes on his person. And I wonder if by putting them on, it didn't remind him that it wasn't him, it was the office. Okay, I want you to look at verses 36 to 38 for a second. The last two portions of this text relate to admonitions to the priest. What's an admonition? Could we use the word warning? Would that be easier? A certain kind of warning to the priest? The uniform reminded the servant of God's distinct call in his life. So what I'm looking at is, look at verse 36, and it says, you'll make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it, like the engravings of the seal, holy to the Lord. Kodesh LaAdonai, holy to the Lord. You'll fasten it on a blue cord, and it shall be on the turban in front of the turban. So across the front of your head, it's going to say, holy to the Lord. Now, one of the purposes of this was for this guy to know that his mind, his heart, his person was to be holy to the Lord. Right on the front of his head, a simple sign. You belong to my purposes, my call, my ends. You're going to see this again when we look in Levitical law. Let me just, in order to move it very quickly though, go to 39 to 43. Okay, 28, 39 to 43, and then we're going to change this up and do something different because I can tell you're going to need me to. 28 to 28, 39 to 43. The uniform kept the focus on God. So look what it says. In 39 it says, you shall weave the tunic of checkered work of fine linen, and shall make a turban of fine linen, and you shall make a sash, the work of a weaver. For Aaron's sons you shall make tunics. Also sashes, caps, for glory and beauty. In other words, I want all of the priests to wear something unique, but I want the high priest to wear something that's extraordinary. So God made a dress code for modesty and for holy care. God stepped in and he told them, by the way, in verse 42, you might want to underline linen breeches to cover their bare flesh. That's how God answered the problem of going up to the altar. He gave them pants. They didn't have pants. That was something new. The first people to wear pants in the Israelite culture that we know of are priests. So pants became a priestly item. What's important is, it says, so then they shall be on, verse 43, they shall be on Aaron and his sons when they enter the tent of meeting or when they approach the altar to minister to the holy place, so that they do not incur guilt and die. It will be a statute forever to him and to his descendants after him. In other words, there's a dress code for priests, and priests always wear it. Here's my question. Is there a dress code for us? Is there a dress code for New Testament believers as they worship the Lord? Does anything go? Can anybody think of a passage anywhere in the Bible where a dress code is addressed for men and women?
Paul addresses modesty issues.
In 1 Timothy 2, he addresses it. He says, therefore I want men in every place to pray, lifting up holy hands without wrath and dissension. In other words, men, when you come in to pray to worship, put aside all your arguing. Stop arguing and start praying. And then it says, likewise, in the same way, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair, gold or pearls or costly items, but rather with means of good works. He's making a comparative. He's not saying you can't wear gold. He's saying that the gold doesn't substitute for your good works, so you're supposed to work hard on the inner qualities of godly, womanly behavior. But there's also another one. Do you remember, ladies, in the first century, you were told when you went in to worship or to pray that you were to do so with your head what? Covered. And that was true of all Romans. Even pagan Romans always thought that you were holy if you wore a covering. That, by the way, is how nuns got a habit, okay? The question is this: what did he say about men? He said for men to wear a hat or not wear a hat as part of their worship. Not. But that was shocking to a Roman. Romans were used to having the women wear coverings. They weren't used to having men not. Why? Because free Romans, libertine Romans, those who had been slaves and were set free, what was the symbol of your freedom? A cap, a pileus. It's a cap that looks like a Smurf hat. It has a little kind of funnel that bends to the front, okay? That pileus was the symbol of freedom. Paul said, take it off. Why? Because you're a slave to Jesus Christ. So men came in and took their hat off, and it was a respect for their servant of Jesus Christ. Ladies, you put one on, but everybody had, even the pagans wore a covering over their head. All discreet women wore their head covered. But men normally did too. See, it's funny because today people talk about whether women should cover theirs, but nobody talks about the opposite. It's exactly the opposite problem Paul was facing. Paul didn't have to convince any women to cover their head. They all did. He had to convince men to take their hats off, and that was offensive to them. So as time goes on, right, the problems flip-flop one over the other. All right, look, here's the bottom line. When you read 28, you walk away with the fact that God called priests, and the uniform and the fabric of the uniform was to help them to know who they were supposed to be.